Envy, we got a package today. Move it.
No way I can move this on my own. Gluttony. 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 Pride, have you seen Gluttony?
No.
I've always been grateful that when Full Metal Alchemist chooses to depict tragedy or crimes in general, it's often given a great amount of weight. For instance, the death of Hughes was shocking, but it wasn't just used as shock factor. It's something that affected Roy, and he spent the whole story trying to avenge and eventually recovering from those feelings of vengeance from losing his best friend. And the death of Nina haunted Ed and Al through the whole story. Even after saving Amestris and getting their bodies back, the fact that they couldn't save Nina was something that always bothered them. Those were both big events, but to bring up the care with which Full Metal Alchemist is written, I would also like to bring up the case of Mrs. Bradley. So Mrs. Bradley, no first name given, is the wife of Führer King Bradley, and unbeknownst to her, her husband is a homunculus who was created to lead the country into despair. And essentially she is a prop. Their whole family is something that is engineered to look good for the people. And on my adult rewatch of Full Metal was when the Bradley family in general became something very interesting to me. And I think the simplest way to write a story like this would be perhaps Mrs. Bradley is hypnotized, maybe she is a hostage, or maybe she just plain out doesn't know, and we feel really bad for her because we know that her husband is terrible and he doesn't love her at all. Which is actually something that the other characters assume. However, I feel like the shocker and the really interesting thing about this is that he really does love her. Bradley himself is not the character who you would think he would be. It would have been really easy for him to just be angry and mean all the time, but he has a really cute personality. I became particularly interested in the Bradley family because I'm a big fan of tragedy. And to me, tragedy isn't just a sad thing happening, it's the loss of a potential. And the Bradley family has layers. When you first see them, it is when you've learned that King Bradley is a homunculus, and you see that he has a cute loving family, and you say, oh no, his poor family. Then you find out later that his son was also a homunculus, which would make you feel like, oh, the real victim here was his wife, who is just a regular person. But I think what's interesting about it is, first, that King Bradley actually loved his wife, and second, that their son was also fond of his wife, which is a big deal for Pride because he doesn't seem to like anyone. And that's where the tragedy is. Their family could not have continued the way it was. Their family could not have existed had Wrath and Pride been honest about who they were. There are these scenes where they're together as a family, and you wonder how much of that is real. How much were they enjoying their time together? And I think that this time was limited makes it something kind of beautiful in its own twisted way. Which is why I really appreciate that in the end of the story, Mrs. Bradley was not forgotten. She did lose her husband, but she found out who her son was, and she ended up loving him anyway. And she still had her son. I think that had both of them been eradicated, that would have maybe looked really cool on screen to say, oh, we got rid of all the homunculi. And very few people may have thought, but what about Mrs. Bradley? I am very glad that she was remembered, and that even though she had no first name, and I don't think droves of people would have been upset if there had not been closure for her, I'm happy that she was thought of. So while I do like King Bradley himself, I would say he's my third favorite homunculus. I think a lot of that comes from his relationship with his family and from his wife in particular. Which is why when Megahouse announced a scale figure of Wrath, I had to get it. It looks like the box is messing with my exposure, so I'm going to turn on my lights now. So Megahouse has made a couple Full Metal Alchemist figures. First, they made that Ed that I hate. But most recently, they have made the Ed and Al light up base combo figure. They also made a combo figure of Roy and Riza, and a light up base figure of Greedling. So all of these are categorized as Precious Gem. Gem is their normal figure line, and Precious Gem is their fancy figure line. When Wrath was first announced, I assumed he would be a Precious Gem and would come with a light up base like a Greedling, but he did not. So I was rather surprised to see Wrath announced as a figure. A lot of figures, I would say, are made of Mustang and Ed. They seem to be the most popular figure subjects, with even Al mostly has like a pop-up parade. He doesn't have that many dedicated figures the way that Ed and Roy do. So to see Wrath was quite surprising, and I am very passionate about the homunculi, which is the reason I went for him. I considered going for Greedling, especially since I feel like he's going to raise in value. But if we're talking about Greed, I really do prefer the original Greed. And if we're talking about Ling, I really prefer regular Ling. So if they had done either of those, I would have definitely gotten that one, but I didn't. Another disappointing thing about Wrath not being a Precious Gem is that he was still priced very high. And originally the figure was shown with no base, no attachments of any kind. I was really hoping that a better base would be added, but it was not. Good Smile Company also recently announced a pop-up parade of Wrath, which I was incredibly excited about, which makes it interesting to me that that two companies are randomly putting out a Wrath figure. I don't think that Wrath is unpopular, but being an old man and not like a sexy lady or a cool young dude is an interesting choice. And I am hoping that we will start to get more homunculi, like at least Lust. Please Lust. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at the figure. This is the first time I have ordered one of the gems myself. I got this from AmiAmi, which was one of the places that carried it. And it comes in its own box. So like it was in the shipping box, and then it was in another box. And the box is like, it's perfectly sized for the figure box. I'm going to hang on to it because I'm tickled by how perfectly sized it is, and it feels fancy, but yeah, that's another box to be burdened with as a figure collector. But the figure's box itself is rather large, I would say. It has no window on it. The Ed and Al Megahouse gem figure, which I bought secondhand, also has no window on it. So I guess this is just normal for this line. I had some concerns that this wouldn't be a treasured part of my collection, since as far as being an old man, he doesn't really go with my cute girls and cute boys. But I had a ton of fun opening him. So Wrath comes very well protected. He also has pieces of plastic in his neck and in his arms, so you can just pop out his head and his arms to get those off. I also thought it was funny that his arms pop out, because that reminds me of the last day of his life. Speaking of the last day of his life, this figure is modeled after the outfit that he wore on the promise day. One thing that's been funny to me is seeing other people's reactions to the Bradley figures, and people are excited to see him wearing particular outfits. I have always been fond of his tight black outfit, but it's funny to see that other people have thoughts about his other outfit. I would say that this white button-down shirt is a very good choice. If he were wearing his full military coat, that wouldn't look as cool as this one, so I am very glad that they picked this particular outfit. If anyone's curious, both of his hands are closed and the two swords are glued into his hands, so they're not removable. He also has this thing on the back of his belt, which I call the lint roller. Overall, he feels very sturdy, which is another thing that I like. I like holding him by the waist like he's an action figure. I think that's an interesting change from having so many cute little anime characters, is like getting one that's he's just a block. He's a hunk of man. Well, the swords are not removable. The head is pretty easy to pop out. So the one that he ships with has his eye patch, and the extra head has his ultimate eye showing. The expressions on both heads are the same. The only difference is the eye patch. And out of the two, I prefer the eye patch because that's more of how I think of him. So I will be displaying mine with the eye patch head. He's fabulous. So his base is a black disc with 2 plastic pegs on it. Those fit into 2 holes on the bottom of his foot. And even on the base, he feels incredibly sturdy. I'm not worried about there being no metal pegs or anything. This figure doesn't need them. Also good to know I won't have to worry about leaning. Like, he feels very strong. He feels like a prize figure, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Just like, if you ever picked up a prize figure, they're just like heavy and they feel sturdy, which is how I feel about him. On his base, we have his name and the name of the series. It also has a design on it, which is where I have a small complaint. So the design is a combination of an eye and an Ouroboros. And I think what that's meant to depict is his eye with the tattoo in it, or it could also just be that his power itself is his ultimate eye. I get what they were going for, I get the concept, but I think that the design looks kind of dumb. I wish that they had just put a full Ouroboros on it. It also makes me worry about consistency among the set. So we already have Greedling, who has the light up base with the rocks, so there's no Ouroboros on that base. Then we have Wrath, who has a modified Ouroboros. So right off the bat, the 2 homunculi bases don't match, and I have no idea if they plan to make more homunculi, but what would they do with their bases? Are they going to modify the Ouroboros in the same way to reflect their powers? Like, what would they put on Lust? Would they put her boobs? For Envy, would they just put like a leg? I get what they were going for, but Two more concerns about this figure are its size and whether it is overpriced. So Megahouse has a reputation for making things a little small. This figure also doesn't officially have a scale, though the Ed and Al figure is considered to be around 1/8 scale. Comparing his size to other figures, Wrath is 9 inches tall, which I think is a pretty good size for a figure. When I look for prize figures, I try to get them to be at least 8 inches tall so that they'll go well with my scales. Comparing him to Tamamo no Mae, who is a 1/7 scale, it's a little bit difficult because Fullmetal Alchemist has very round and more realistic character proportions. So Tamamo's head is definitely way bigger than his. I also put him next to Mikuru, who would logically be shorter than him because she is a teenage girl. But I would say that proportionally he goes a little bit better with Mikuru, so I'm going to place him around 1/8 scale. Y'all, I don't know what I was thinking during this part. He's absolutely 1/8 scale. Tamamo is enormous next to him, and she's a woman, and he's a full-grown man, and she's like hunched over. If she stood up all the way, she'd be like 8 feet tall next to him. He's absolutely 1/8 scale. He displays very well with figures of those sizes, and I don't feel ripped off by his size at all. His price, however. So this figure retailed for about 16k yen. Back when I started collecting figures, scale figures were about $60 to $80. If you paid $100 for a scale figure, it came with a nice base. Like, it was a big deal for a figure to surpass $100. In this year, 2022, that is no longer a significant thing. And Wrath is a very simple figure. His pose isn't dynamic. He doesn't have a crazy base. And even though his quality is very good, I did purchase him out of love for the character and not because I felt like getting a deal. So in simpler terms, I do agree that he's overpriced, but I don't think there's much we can do about it. Also, concerning his price, I do not buy to sell, but I'm very curious if he will become very valuable in the future. Sometimes with figures of not as well-loved characters from popular franchises, not as many people will purchase the figure. Then in the aftermath, people will realize they wanted to have it, or maybe new people who never knew about it before will want it, and the price will go up. I looked at MFC, and less than 100 people even ordered this figure. I think I'm one of 50, 60 people on MFC who own this figure, which is pretty surprising since it's Full Metal Alchemist, but it is also King Bradley. So even though I was not in love with the price, that was another reason that I felt like I should order him, because I think back in the day I could rely on him going into the bargain bin or people selling him off for cheap, but I did not want to take the risk with this figure. Regarding display of the figure, I have put him in my detail with my Ed and Al figure and with Tamamo no Mae. So I arrange my figures based on color, and this shelf I wanted to do dark colors with an emphasis on blue, which made Wrath and his blue pants a great fit. I don't emphasize displaying characters from the same series together, but it is nice seeing them side by side. So I think that wraps up the Bradley hour. To me, this figure was absolutely worth it, and I had a lot more fun just opening him and owning him than I thought I would. I'm really looking forward to Good Smile Company's pop-up parade Bradley, because he has a different outfit, which means I can own them both. And I'm looking forward to the future of Full Metal Alchemist figures. Since this is an older series, I'm always holding my breath on there being more figures. And in the height of its popularity, they didn't make that many figures. So I'm hoping that as a legacy classic series, we'll start getting more stuff more often. And you can bet that whatever it is, especially if it's homunculi, I'll be there.
Full Metal Alchemist. It took me all day to move that box. Too bad everyone was too busy to help me.
Meanwhile, Full Metal Alchemist.
So, in simpler terms, I do agree that he's overpriced. Two more concerns about this figure are its price. Two more concerns about this figure are whether it is oversized and its price. Two more concerns about this figure are whether it is overpriced and its size. Two more concerns about this figure are little baby boy, little baby, he's a baby, little baby, come here, little baby. He's a baby, baby boy. Oh, okay, little baby. Okay, little baby.